The longsword is a two-handed weapon used in the late medieval period across Europe. It is also called the hand-and-a-half sword or bastard sword. It has a long, straight, two-edged blade measuring about 40 to 50 inches long. The sword has a hilt of about 7 inches long and a large rounded pommel at the end of the hilt. It can weigh between 2.5 and 5 pounds. A key characteristic of this weapon is its versatility. It can be wielded with either one hand or two, and can be used in armored or unarmored combat. The longsword could also either be used on foot or on horseback. This weapon emerged in the 1300s across Europe. It was mainly used in knightly combat. The longsword came into being at a time when mail armor was given way to plate armor. Although the exact reason why the weapon was created is still unknown. By the 1500s, it was only used for sport, and continued in sport until about 1700.
A very early example of a two-handed sword. They start to get to the point in the 1200s where they can make a really long blade like this that won't break on them in battle. The metal quality has improved to that point. And this really makes possible the two-handed sword, something that's never really been possible up until that date. And you can tell it's a true two-hander with this really long grip, and I can certainly feel it with the weight in my hand. The balance of this really requires two hands to control it.
There were a number of important masters of the longsword during the Middle Ages, many of whom originated from Germany. Johannes Lichtenauer was one of the greatest German fencing masters active during the 1300s. He established a tradition of fighting techniques that carried on for centuries. Lichtenauer never wrote any manuscripts or manuals, but he composed verses about his teachings that were written down and interpreted after his death. The Starnberg manuscript is one of the most important documents in the Lichtenauer tradition. Written in 1452, this source contains a complete rendering of Lichtenauer's teachings for the longsword's use, on foot and on horseback, as well as in armored and unarmored combat. Lichtenauer's teachings also influenced Johannes Lecuchner, a 15th century German cleric and fencing master. Although Lecuchner's treatise of 1482 focused on the single-handed sword, the techniques are largely the same as the longsword. Lecuchner is one of the most important sources on Lichtenauer's style of sword fighting. The last major German author on the longsword was Joachim Meyer. Meyer was a fencing master in the late 1500s at a time when the longsword was only used for sport. Still, his Art of Combat, published in 1570, remained in the Lichtenauer tradition. Meyer's manual is a comprehensive encyclopedia of our traditional German martial arts. However, perhaps thanks to Italian influence, Meyer provides a much more detailed and systematic explanation of the longsword combat than the earlier German sources, and his work stands as one of the most important texts of the medieval German tradition. Not all major masters of the longsword originated from Germany. Fiore della Berri was an Italian fencing master in the late 1300s. He wrote The Flower of Battle, an influential combat treatise that contained descriptive text and images for longsword techniques. Fiore's teachings were copied by other Italian masters and even appear in German manuscripts, giving clear evidence that this influence extended outside of Italy. Fiore's teachings can still be seen in the Italian treatises of the early 1500s, though by the mid-1500s this medieval weapon had fallen out of fashion in Italy. The proper grip to hold the longsword requires the dominant hand to be positioned on the grip against the crossbar and your secondary hand on the pommel. This is the basic fist grip. You also have the option of rotating the sword 90 degrees and placing your thumb on the blade. This utilizes the movement of the wrist, useful for tactics that attack the opponent while protecting the body. For armored combat, the fencer holds the blade with his left hand in order to gain more accuracy to pinpoint to gaps in an opponent's armor. Here is the low guard and the high guard. From the high guard, a murder blow can be executed to strike the opponent with the pommel. The proper stance for wielding a longsword is standing low and relaxed with your knees bent and on the balls of your feet. The high cut involves a fencer to go into the high guard, to long point, to fool. The wrath cut moves from the wrath guard into long point, into fool. The middle cut is a sweeping cut across the body to hit your opponent's middle section. The low cut moves from the side guard into the long point to the unicorn. A great exercise to do with any sword is the molinet. The weapon is rotated on both sides to develop fluidity and relaxation in the arms, shoulders, and wrists. It also has combat applications, as some cuts require the same motion as well as a helicopter motion over the head. This exercise mirrors the leader's moves. Vertical cut forward, moving away with triangle steps. This exercise teaches students how to parry certain cuts, delivering a high cut, a low cut, and then moving away. This exercise teaches students guards and cuts, advancing with a certain cut and retreating with the same. It also teaches stepping and movement. This is a finishing technique that hits the opponent on the head with the pommel. This is another finishing technique that disarms the opponent completely.